Hi, I'm Felicia.
And I'm Sam.
Welcome to the Bootleg Book Club. And this week we are on episode 2 of season 2, and we are reading People Person by Candice Carty Williams. So if you could show the yes.
This is what the book looks like.
Great. So just a little bit starting off with about the author. Candice Carty Williams is a well-known author for her award-winning first novel, Queenie, and she was born in South London, so she's known as a British writer, and she actually works with a wide range of writing skills and in the book industry. Right now, she's in the publishing world as a marketer for literary fiction, nonfiction, and graphic novels. And she's written other publications and articles that you could find. One thing I wanted to really stress and thought was a really interesting fun fact about her is that when she decided to study at Sussex, she did media because when she was in her sixth form class, a teacher actually told her she wasn't clever enough to do English.
That's so wild, considering her career now.
Exactly. So now, considering this career, working at the Guardian Guide and then moving into publishing at only the age of 23, and now she's even older and doing so many other things, writing was her true calling all along. So now just leading into about the book, just to give you a short little teaser on it. The book is based on the story of, it's from one point of view, but it's based on the children of Cyril Pennington and how they grow up and learn to deal with life with pretty much a father who pretty much abandoned them. And the story is told through Dimple's point of view. She's the middle child, and she ends up in a life crisis, going through a life issue, and she finds that it's time to call her oldest half-sibling. And the oldest half-sibling kind of decides to bring all the siblings together, and now they have this great insight of who they are, and you kind of see a little bit of other people's point of views as they go through the next life phase together for the next year.
Really, they have a life-altering event that they ultimately, I would say, almost choose to experience together and like stick together despite the fact that they grew up not really knowing each other, and really only thing that they had in common was a father, like a deadbeat father, honestly.
Right. So knowing that, just a little tidbit, we could get into the POV, the point of view. This is kind of where we say who our least and favorite characters are. You could go ahead and start us off.
So I think we actually have our about the same favorite character, Nikisha. Like even from the very beginning, I was like, what a good big sister. She doesn't necessarily always say or do the right thing, but even from the beginning, like in a particular scene when they were children and meeting each other, she says to them, take down my number. If anything happens, call me. And I just think even from the beginning, you're seeing how good of a sister she is, and I really, really liked that.
Right.
Also, maybe I identified with that because I'm a big sister too.
Just a bit, yes. Nikisha was my favorite character also. One thing in particular that she says along, not just like take my number and call me, she says it a lot when they're older. I don't see it as you're my half siblings, like you're my full sibling. And I thought that was very touching to see and read about, and just seeing that experience that she's trying to really bring everybody together. And I will also say that my honorable mention, I think I just loved a lot more moments with Nikisha, but the other sibling I really liked is Danny. And really because he has a son, and just the relationship, he's very much intentional about, I don't want the relationship I had with my dad to continue on. He's definitely in that phase of, I'm breaking generational curses. Not that he like says it like that, but he expressed so much love for his
I was going
son.
to say, I don't know that the book ever says generational curses or anything like that, but that's like the one thing that kept coming to mind for me was, I think I wrote that down, like, book is about generational trauma and curses.
Right.
I don't know if the book ever specifically said that. It might have, but like that's like the theme that kept coming to mind for me.
Right. And then for me, on the least favorite character, I have Lizzie, who was also another sibling, and then Chiron, and he wasn't a sibling. He was just pretty much
the evil bad guy.
Yeah, the evil bad guy. He was Dimple's boyfriend, and he just has so many issues. And I was just like, what are we doing here? Like, why is this happening?
Literally like a villain.
Like the villain. And it did make me think, people really are dealing with people who are like this in the world. So that seemed really disheartening. And then Lizzie, just because I do understand, well, I will never fully understand, I don't have any half siblings, but it felt really rough the way that she was always distancing herself. So, and just being very cold shoulder. And I think it was a way for her to protect herself and to protect the peace that she created when the father pretty much abandons them. But it was kind of just, I felt like everybody else was trying, but you're not putting much effort.
I disagree. Even without me being in the situation, I understand that. I understand that I didn't grow up with you guys. I understand that, I've created a life for myself. You guys are trying to insert yourself into my life, and you are expecting me to be hunky-dory and ready to go along with everything already. And I frankly think that wasn't 100% fair necessarily. Like, it might take time for her to feel that she can warm up to this idea, especially because this whole idea of them getting close again comes out of trauma together. So I definitely understood where she was coming from, to be 100% honest.
That part makes sense. It's more so when she has interactions with her siblings. It becomes really well known. It does seem that she is the judgmental type, that she is, which I don't think was true judgmental. I just think she just wasn't giving people chances.
She was a little bit harsher.
So that's what it was. Like, really rough around the edges there for me.
Yeah.
Do you have any other? Because you didn't really say your least favorite. Do you want
all the men?
Ooh.
All the men in the book.
Yes.
So it started with the father, like, dang, he's horrible. And then we're introduced to Chiron. I was like, he's horrible.
Mm-hmm.
And then we are introduced to the brothers. And they're not necessarily horrible, but we'll get into this more in the deep dive. But Prince, which is the youngest, doesn't take anything serious. I know you said you felt like Danny had good moments. And I do agree. Danny did have good moments. However, there was one thing that bothered me. It was this whole thing about motherhood. So I don't know if you caught this, but the mother of his child did not want a baby.
Yes.
And he convinced her to have the child and then give the child, and then like he said he would raise the child.
Right.
But then when it came time to raise a child, it's not that he wasn't raising the child. He was an actively participating father. However, he was surprised that her motherhood did not kick in. Maternity instinct.
This expectation.
Like, he had an expectation that, once she has the child, that will kick in. She already told you she didn't really want the child.
Right.
So that bothered me about him. And then Roman, which I will just say is another male character. We could probably reveal what
he's another love interest.
He's another love interest for Dimple. I thought he was very matter of fact, and I appreciated that as well.
Right.
But at the end of the day, no matter how matter of fact you are, if you're wrong, you're wrong. Like, when I say matter of fact, like, he said things the way it was.
Mm.
But at the same time, I don't think he said things like, this is just the way it is. But I don't think he necessarily acknowledged that, yes, this is the way it is, but what I'm doing is also wrong.
Right.
So that bothered me as well. So yeah, I don't know. I didn't like any of the male characters very much.
They not the best, but
not the best at all.
Yes. So now then we could kind of go into the deep dive here. The deep dive is just a spoiler alert section we want to give because we're going to be discussing specific details and how the book really resonated with us. And we go in through a lot of topics. We won't spoil everything, but there will be a few major spoilers to really discuss the book.
I agree. Okay. So
I could start off because I have a bookmark. I actually have 2 this time.
And I don't have any. I think this might have been because like I was listening to an audiobook, so I definitely wrote down like some of my favorite moments, but I didn't really write down any of like my favorite quotes. But you can go ahead.
I wonder if there is a way, it makes me think like audiobooks to highlight a section.
Like I think there's a way to highlight a section, but
I would want to come back because these quotes I really was fond of.
Okay.
So these are towards the end of the book, very end, because the book is like 320 pages. And I have on page 300, I'm not saying you need to toughen up, but you need to know who you are and take accountability for who that person is. That's when you'll stop apologizing for everything. And this is Nikisha talking to Dimple. Dimple is a very sensitive person. This book surrounds her and the kind of emotional state that she's always is, and her not realizing how naive she is and how she comes across to other people. And she ends up in this moment in the end, like really overly apologizing, also of like, what do I do to fix things? Is anything really bad? And the sister was just like, I don't have much for you, but I really appreciated her. Like, I'm not really trying for you to change yourself, right? She didn't say, Nikisha's a very tough person. She didn't say, like, you have to be me.
Yeah.
She's like really saying, just discover who you are and stand in that.
And I would have used those exact words. Stand in that. Stand in that and don't feel the need to apologize for being who you are.
Exactly.
Just accept who you are and accept that, okay, I'm a more emotional person, but it also makes me a more caring person too, maybe, and acknowledge that.
Yes, that there are positives to it, and that's where you could come into a place of not apologizing for every single moment and just who you are when you discover and know who you are.
Right.
Then I have, I think that you're a people person in the way that you get people. You see people and like properly see people. You see us. You see who we all are in our own way. And you don't judge us for it. You don't ask people to be who they aren't. And I don't think many people are like that. So this comes from actually Prince talking to Dimple. Mm-hmm. So in the beginning, Prince, from the very beginning, of course, the book is called People Person. It's their dad who's first considered as a people person. And it's like he was a people person, but he's not there for his kids. So charismatic. So how does that happen? And Dimple describes herself, and she wanted to always say, well, I'm a people person too, because my job is I want to be an influencer, different things like that. And Prince just really shuts her down. I was like, I don't think you're a people person, And throughout the book, he kind of reconsiders this. And I thought this was really interesting you could be something, you could be a people person and be it in your own way, right? We have these clear-cut definitions of things, but people can embody that because I think she's a people person in her own right of the way that she takes care of her siblings, the way that she takes care of others around her, So there are different ways to be this type of people person, which at times is admired. So I really liked that. And I really liked that growth for Prince also because he is seen as a character that is laid back. He says things, not
serious.
Yeah. So for it to also come from him in the way that will really impact Dimple in a positive way, I think that was good and full circle also.
And I thought it was a good thing to point out because I was thinking like, this maybe can help her with understanding that, yes, she may be an emotional person, but that emotional side of her allows her to empathize with other people, allows her to really see into people. Yes. And so I thought that was something that kind of came together as well.
Right. And it just shows in the end that she was also the one able to really, there gets to this breaking point of the siblings needing a new way to interact with each other, I think, because everything is blowing up. And Dimple was able to kind of lead the way of solving that through her emotions, right? Of really like, well, we need to discuss this and talk about it.
Right. So before we go into the rose, thorn, and bud, I think we should just go ahead and reveal like what brings the siblings together.
Right.
And what brings the siblings together is that unfortunately Dimple breaks up with her boyfriend because she realizes it's a toxic relationship. However, he comes over and basically abuses her. And so in the midst of that, of her trying to get away, she, I want to say like pulls away or something, and he like stumbles back. And he stumbles into the kitchen where she had like there was an oil that had fallen on the floor, and she hadn't had a chance to clean it up yet. And he slips and basically bangs his head on the kitchen counter, and then there's so much blood that she truly believes that he has died, basically. And she's like, if I call the police, they're gonna think I killed him. There's no way, like, because you know, they both, like, she has bruises on her from him basically strangling her. And he has scratches on him from her trying to get away from him. So she's like, no way the police are going to believe me. And the first thing she thinks of is Nikisha always said, like, if anything happens, call me. So she calls Nikisha, and Nikisha rounds up all of the siblings. Yes. And basically they help Dimple with basically getting rid of the body. Right. And they all take on a role and all of that. However, Chiron, turns out, is not actually dead. And so
he alive.
He alive. And the book is about how they are now handling this situation. They're trying to figure out, what does Chiron remember? Right. If Chiron remembers, what are they going to do? How are they going to make sure that they don't get in trouble? Planning, strategizing. So that is now what the rest of the book is.
There was a moment of, where is Chiron? Because he kind of disappears. Mm-hmm. It's all aftermath of this one incident.
Exactly. And honestly, I had actually wrote down in a note where I was like, this book, quite frankly, to me, didn't necessarily have very many twists and turns, but I can truthfully say it didn't end where I saw or thought it would be ending at. And I truly believe, let me just go ahead and say, I wish they had unalived Chiron. Okay? I don't care. That's how I feel. So by the end of the book,
he was no good.
He was no good.
So going into Rose, Thorn, and Bud, the highs and lows officially now, my low for me would be seeing how mistreated Dimple is by her mom and dad. Mainly her dad, because of course he abandoned her and he is the cause of so much pain and hurt, and that is a really huge issue. But for me also, it was a bit surprising to see and read was her mom. And it was understandable in the sense of the dad didn't just cause his children hurt and trauma of abandonment, but each of the mothers. Mm-hmm. So that also impacted the way that Dimple was raised and the connection and relationship she had with her mom, which overall was a really good relationship. But there's moments where when Dimple is now really trying to reconnect with her siblings and the mom is saying, oh, am I not enough for you now? You realize Dimple probably didn't have friends growing up because the mom was really dependent and connected to Dimple. So Dimple didn't get the sense of being who she is either because of her mom also. So that felt pretty low to read.
Yeah, and I think there was an interdependence that was kind of created where Dimple is not very independent at all. And you learn that it's not even just about the fact that she lives at home. It's that like her mom knows like when her periods are and like, tracks all these things for her. And I think there's a level of I was left and I never want to have that feeling of being left again. And so Dimple relies on me, and so she will never leave me. And so I think that honestly kinds to turn into toxicity as Dimple tries to get closer to her siblings.
Right.
Um, yeah. So, how about your favorite parts?
My favorite part is really seeing the siblings come together overall, because even though it was within and over a traumatic moment, the siblings are really funny. Like, they end up just cracking me up, and there's just a lot of humor that carries throughout the book that kind of brings everything together a little bit.
There's a lot of comedic relief.
Yes, comedic relief, especially just really recognizing that this is how siblings act. Right. So I think the writing was really on point for that section for me.
Right. I think for me, that was definitely one of my favorite things as well. I even wrote a note that like the title of the book could have been Pennington Kids, and it was just so funny. Like even when they were arguing or if they were agreeing, just like the back and forth, it was just really hilarious to me. And I was listening to it on audiobook, and there were moments where like I would be doing something around my place, and then like I might like stop what I was doing just to just like laugh, like, and just cackle out loud, honestly, by myself, just listening to this book. And then another thing that was one of my favorites was that despite their differences, despite the fact that they, you know, clearly didn't start out being close, this event brings them together when they're definitely older, like 20s, 30s. But there's this moment where they're at Dimple's home and they're having dinner with her mother, and her mother just, you know, is being rude, quite frankly, to the siblings. And at one point, so Danny, the older brother, has gone to jail, and then she's just asking him about that, and she's making comments about them only being half siblings. And he says, well, first of all, I have no regrets. You know, it was a part of my journey to becoming who I am.
Right.
It was part of me growing up. And like it was necessary for me to grow up and like just become who I am. And then he also says blood is blood and there is no half siblings here. And like they really just come together in that moment. I would say even Lizzie, who you mentioned you didn't care for too much, I think even in that moment she says, I'm not better than Danny.
Right.
You know, he has his business together. He's taking care of his family. You know, it is what it is. Like we all have our own past. We're all taking care of business. So I thought that moment where they really kind of came together, stuck up for each other, I really appreciated that. I liked that a lot.
Okay. And I will say the only other thing I liked too was getting more in-depth point of view. It's definitely told from Dimple's point of view, but there's certain sections in the chapter where you see from the dad's point of view and you see from Chiron's point of view, and just seeing what is going on here to have a full story. And I didn't mind it done in that way, because sometimes I think that is one of the hardest things, like having different point of views and making sure it's not like overdone or like underdone of like, well, what was the point of switching? So I think it was done in a pretty good way. And I'm actually a fan of this epilogue because I think it kind of, for me, it shows where the ending of where the siblings are later on, a couple years later, of still together and still strong in the relationship.
I didn't 100% understand the epilogue other than the fact that there was a funeral. I won't say whose funeral it was, but I just was like, I didn't really fully understand everything that was going on. I also forgot to mention that a piece of the book that was difficult to read were Dimple's moments with Chiron, her first initial love interest, turned, I would say, villain of the story. Basically, like there were moments where I just felt like I almost wanted to shout at her, like almost like when you're watching a TV and like you're saying like, don't open that door, like he's clearly trying to manipulate you, he's clearly trying to do XYZ, like this is not a good situation to be in, like get away from him. Like I was just like I was just frustrated with those kind of moments.
Yes.
And that's partially where I was just like, he should have just died. But yeah. So then
we're in bookish now. So when we talk about the book, but it reminds us of these real life factors or concepts. And I would really say overall, this was a different genre than we've really done. it is fiction, but it's definitely adult fiction. And for this all seemed very real, very realistic, very intentional in that way. And I would say, though, overall, one topic that was, again, really done well is just the siblings' dynamics and the relationship the siblings have with each other, and showing how what actually brings a family together. Because yes, they're together and they say we're siblings to help Dimple come through, but really later on they realize, we need to share feelings, we need to have other aspects that makes us family to really see how can we function properly, I think.
Right.
And really just going towards the rough draft.
Another piece that was realistic to me, and part of the bookish segment, is like the generational trauma and the generational curses, basically, because we learn that Dolores, Cyril's mother and the kids' grandmother, basically she moved to the UK after giving birth to Cyril. They're from Jamaica. She moves to the UK and leaves Cyril behind. And then it's not until he's 15 that she sends for him and he comes to the UK. So he grew up thinking that Dolores was his older sister, not his mother. Also grew up believing that his grandparents were his parents. So clearly he's likely dealing with abandonment issues. And it's not to excuse his behavior, but it's to explain his behavior, and then how he goes on to truly ended up abandoning his own children. And then you just see how that kind of was passed down. But I appreciate that what this book does is they show you how you can break generational trauma and curses, in the sense that now we see Danny really taking an active role in raising his son. So I thought that was really good.
Right. Then from there, we could go into rough draft, where we further discuss other rough moments to read. I think for me, again, it's really seeing Dimple's experience and her being abused, that no matter what, that is really rough to read throughout the book. And that's something, again, it is the book. It's part of the book. It's the essence of the book that brings it together, even though you have the side pieces of sibling relationship. So that was really tough. And then also to see how that relates later on to the way, honestly, her dad gets to abuse her in a way, right, too? Because
completely mistreating her.
Because there's like physical abuse, but this is like, a sense of mental, honestly, for me.
Mental and financial.
Mental, financial.
Because he lies.
Yes, he lies.
To get money from
manipulates. Her. It's so much hurt there for Dimple. But I
wouldn't say she's falling for it. I think there's a part of her that knows she shouldn't be giving him money, but there's a part of her that's like, I want to be seen by my dad. I want to be contacted by my dad. I want, so that ends up happening.
Right. And I think the other thing for me, it was really rough to read about how all the kids, siblings, have issues with the dad. And Dimple has this moment of like, well, we need to go ask him questions. He needs to answer us, right? For us to have this sense of closure or just some type of thing to help out. And they go to question him. And I didn't get what I was seeking. And clearly they didn't, which was basically, he was answering their questions, and it just gets to this part of, actually, I don't need to answer to you. I don't need this. And it wasn't the happily ever after, right? I wanted, like, maybe Cyril has regrets or different things like that. He would do things differently. But he doesn't. He doesn't see anything wrong with what he does.
He doesn't want a relationship with them, to be frank with you.
Right. Even that.
Doesn't.
And that was
heartbreaking.
Tough. Yes, it was heartbreaking. Exactly.
And it just made me, this book was so good in the sense that it becomes something way different than what I was expecting. Like, I started off thinking it was like some type of mystery thriller, but it really becomes about people and relationships we have with parents, siblings, significant others.
Right.
Like, it is truly deep. deeper than you might think from the onset of like you're beginning to read it. Right. So yeah, I really enjoyed that piece of it, that it showed you the realities of relationships, even if it was difficult to read at times. It shows you the reality of the situations.
Exactly.
But yeah, to break up with a parent is really difficult and just has to be heartbreaking. So do you have any writing wish?
I don't have a writing wish, but I would say, and just something to add, if there was another book that came out that was about another sibling, I would read it.
I would read it too. I would read like Nikisha's story, Lizzie's story, or anything like that. Only person's story I might not read is Prince's, but I wouldn't mind hearing from other people's perspective, not on this situation, but like maybe Nikisha's journey to like, and like what her single motherhood journey is like, or something like that.
And there's so many ways you could like go about it, but I would read another book. I was thoroughly impressed and enjoyed this book.
Yeah, and it makes me want to go and read her first novel, Queenie, which I really want to go read that now. I would only say for me that I don't know that I got as much out of the epilogue as you did necessarily. I felt like Dimple just still, she seems to just have this loneliness about her. Like even in times where her channel, like, because like we said, she wants to be an influencer. Even in times where her channel was like successful or not successful, either way, she just had this like level of loneliness that I don't know that like ever was resolved. And I know that like part of the book is that she's like, the end of it is like you see that she's like learning and like she's being encouraged and pushed
that's what I was gonna
into
say.
the direction of developing herself and like being able to be okay with herself. But I don't know, I guess like that piece is never like fully resolved for me, not even in the epilogue for me, although I know you feel like a little differently.
I do. I think the epilogue and the ending does encompass a little bit of Dimple is given the tools so she could really be okay with who she is. And if that means having moments, even if moments of where I'm alone, but I know who I am, and that's fine. Right. So, but of course, like to further see that develop, again, that would be good if there was another point of view later on to see like how does Dimple interact even more now with siblings and relationships like that.
That makes sense.
But overall, I think it was great. And that's pretty much it. Now we have.
All right. Well, you can check out our rating and our reviews by checking out our Instagram and our blog. Thank you for watching. We really appreciate it. And we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.